Hello everyone, thank you so much for coming to today's event. My name is Alice and I am today's Zoom coordinator and facilitator, and I've been the Zoom coordinator and facilitator for all the events for Black History Month and for TNCG. Just a few housekeeping rules, please. When someone is talking or when a speaker is talking or giving a session, please can everyone keep muted just so that we can hear the lovely sessions that the speakers have for today. And also, if you have any questions and answers, I believe we have a question and answers session happening after the session today. But if you do have questions during the session, please use the emoji to raise your hand, or you can write your questions in the chat, or any comments that you have on the session in the chat as well. Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed today's event.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon, and welcome. I think this is the event that most people have been waiting for. Just in case you don't know me, my name is Yetunde Adeshile. I'm the CEO and founder of the Next Chosen Generation, which is that is taking the lead and has taken the lead in organizing Basildon Black History Month for the last 5 years, which is what gives me sort of like the privilege to be able to speak here and be in the position to introduce all our speakers today. I want to say special thank you to all the people that have turned up today to say one or two things, especially on behalf of the police force, taking them out of their daily routine. Thank you to the community leaders that are here. Thank you so much to Councillor Adrian McGarren for joining us today. Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our Mayor, Councillor David Breton Sampson, for joining us. Thank you so much for being here. And we've got Lady Sidra Naeem, and we've certainly got enough intelligence around the table to be able to maybe get to some sort of result that we might be expecting today. And the first person I'm going to introduce or ask to speak to us is James Swatton from Essex Hate Crime Police. And he's just going to tell us what hate crime is by law.
My name is James Swatton. I'm a hate crime officer for Essex Police. There is no official legal definition of what a hate crime is. If you go through all the Acts of Parliament, there is nothing written down. Now, obviously, we need some sort of framework to work with, because how would you define it if there's no official definition? So the Crown Prosecution Service and the various chief constables of the UK have agreed this definition. A hate crime is any incident, whether a crime or not, which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice towards someone based on a personal characteristic. Hate crime can be perceived to be a hate crime by anyone, not just the victim. All that is required is that the person who reports it has to believe that what has happened because of a prejudice against the victim, against one of the victim's protected characteristics. Now, there are 5 protected characteristics. We have race, which includes people's nationality. We have religion. We have sexual orientation. We have disability, and we have transgender identity. So that's what a hate crime is. To put it really simply, if you think it's a hate crime and it's motivated by hostility against one of those 5 things, it's a hate crime. So that's what hate crime is.
Thank you.
No worries.
Okay, so now we've heard the definition of hate crime, I think we're going to move on to Sidra. Sidra will be presenting to us today on the history of hate crime in the UK, where hate crime all started from. It's quite an interesting aspect to hate crime, especially when we're all here trying to figure out why we don't have equality. I'll let Sidra, without me taking some of what she has to say away from her, I'll let Sidra speak on what the history of hate crime in the UK, the history of hate crime in the UK. There will be an opportunity at the end for questions and answers.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to speak again today. Last time people found it very interesting when I spoke about the history of Black Britain, and we looked at going right back to Roman times, how the first Black people first came to Britain and some of the achievements. Today I thought, after the last one was very, very well received, I thought today again I will do another talk on the history of racism, race hate crime in Britain, going right back to the slave trade to current situations. So I do have a PowerPoint which I'm going to share with you now. Okay, so race hate crime through the ages, the extent and the targets of racist attitudes in Britain have changed over the course of time. The history of racism is actually heavily linked with the relationship with its former colonies and the British Empire, and also attitudes change according to the norms of the British class system. For example, you know, things have been changing now right from the beginning of time to current situations. And racism actually started right from the beginning when the slave trade was actually happening in Britain. By the 18th century, London had the largest Black population made up of free and enslaved people, as well as runaways. But you know, there was actually approximately 10,000. Many of these people were forced into beggary due to the lack of jobs and racial discrimination. Owners of African slaves in England would advertise slave sales and for recapture runaways. This engraving actually shows slaves being loaded onto a ship. And did you know that the slaves were actually being used indirectly as well by using some of the sugar that the slaves were being working on abroad on the sugar plantations? So all of that was going on. And then there was actually a little bit of an uproar amongst the slaves, because did you know that they were not even being paid for all the hard work that they were doing? And there was this slave in particular, Oloda Aquilano. He actually started protesting. He was the first slave that started protesting, and he actually bought his own freedom, and then he actually published a best-selling book as well. He also helped in the abolition of the Slave Trade Act, which was passed by the British Parliament in March 1807. And the MP, William Wilberforce, then took the fight. He was the local MP to Parliament, and it was made law in the land that everybody who on a ship a slave is found has to be fined £100, and that £100 fine really helped because it made many ships go out of business where slaves were found. Slaves didn't even get money for all the work they'd done once they were freed, and there was a huge loss. In fact, did you know the government actually gave money to the people who lost the slaves, but none of the money actually went to the slaves, which is very, very sad. And then after that, it was in 1860 that racism against Black people grew again after the slave business. And race hate was based, discrimination was all based on popular theories of scientific racism. Attempts to support these theories cited scientific evidence such as brain size, and James Hunt, the president of the London Anthropological Society, in 1863 published this paper, which I've got a picture of up here, and it showed things like that on the Negro's place in nature. He wrote that the Negro is inferior intellectually to the European and can only be humanized and civilized by Europeans. Very, very sad to hear. And that book went out everywhere. People read about it, and then they thought that Black people were less intelligent, and the only way would be for Europeans to civilize them. As we go through the ages, the next thing was World War I, and Black people were brought over from Jamaica to fight in the First World War. More Black people came over in the First World War than they did in the Second World War. And there was huge racism. I'm just going to play a video.
The problem was when new officers came in, they potentially had a more sort of racist attitude, looking at sort of black soldiers and not thinking that they were as good as the white soldiers they commanded previously.
There are many stories that that point to the exclusion and discrimination of black soldiers. One could go as far as saying that many have been effectively written out of British military history, and that's really sad.
Okay. When the soldiers returned to the UK after World War I, there was a jobs shortage and a lack of opportunities. White people made the link that they were not getting jobs because of the black people, and violence towards black communities followed. And these were known mainly in the port areas where sailors said, we're not sharing our jobs with black sailors. So in 1919, there were race riots in Glasgow, Liverpool, Cardiff, and other seaports across Britain, during which 3 people were killed and hundreds were injured. This is actually one of those victims, Charles Wotton, who died in these waters 5th June 1919, and this is actually written in British history. By World War I, there were 20,000 black people in Britain, and following disarmament in 1919, surplus of labour and shortage of housing led to dissatisfaction among Britain's working class, in particular, like I said, in the sailors and the dock workers and in ports. And it was very, very sad, because all of those people who decided to stay in Britain after the First World War, there was no thanks to all the work that they did, but instead, nobody would give them any accommodation, and they had to live in slum areas where there was crime, prostitution, and drugs. Some of those areas are Brixton, some of those areas are St. Paul's in Bristol, and there was huge racism against them. Nowadays, it's common in the media, people attack some of the black people for being drug addicts or being on drugs and businesses in drugs and turning to crime. Well, is it a wonder if some of these black people, and most of them, were put in slum areas where crime was absolutely huge and drugs was rife and prostitution was rife? That affected some of the younger children who then grew up maybe to be affected by these kinds of things. And this is something I think that the police really do need to understand, the history of what actually did happen. It was very, very common to have boards on hotels and places of where people were giving out their houses for rent. No Irish, no blacks, no dogs allowed. And it was actually being, through the law, being promoted, where if you desire coloured for your neighbour, vote Labour, and if you already are burdened with one, vote Tory. So it was really, really bad out there. When my dad actually came to this country in 1962, he's actually got dementia now, and he can't remember some of the things of nowadays, but he will always remember how he was treated in this country in 1962 when nobody would give him any residence because most hotels said no coloureds allowed. And they were equated to blacks as well, and the Irish. I know there's an Irish sister on here today watching. It was the Irish as well, really, really bad. That had a huge effect, including on the rich. Now, this is a very famous Trinidadian cricketer called Leary Constantine. And did you know that when he came to Britain on one of his cricket matches, He was turned away from the Imperial Hotel in Russell Square, London in 1943. The proprietor believed his presence would offend American servicemen who were also staying there. So do you know what? He was not happy. He took everybody to task. He actually then went to court, and a public and political opinion was in Constantine's favor over the case in Parliament. The then Under-Secretary of State said the government most strongly condemns any form of racial discrimination against colonial people in this country. He was commended for his work in politics and for racial equality. And this meant that he was the first Black person to sit in the House of Lords and take part in important political debates. After that, he decided to settle in Britain. And after he played cricket there for the West Indies, he decided to settle in Lancashire. It caused a huge stir amongst the community. Why is there a Black people here? And also school children used to come out to look at him because he looked slightly darker than the people they knew who were covered in soot from the coal mines. Very, very sad. This is actually words which the mayor of Pendle, Councillor Tony Beckett, said in those days. But did you know how he won the hearts of the people there in Lancashire? He came out and he got all the children together and he would have cricket matches with them to win their hearts. That's how strong he was. He was actually a legend because he was the first milestone in British racial discrimination, where he challenged everybody and he made people actually accept him in society. He was the first one. After that, we've got the Second World War. And during World War II, Britain recruited nearly 600,000 African men to fight in the Second World War, but more came over in the First World War. The next thing then that happened was after World War II, Black people from the Caribbean and Africa were asked to come to Britain again to rebuild the country. They were put to work in the NHS and public sectors and driving buses, but there was a huge problem in Bristol. Did you know that in Bristol, Black people were not allowed to drive the buses there, and some of them, they were not even allowed to even go on the buses. So some of the Black people, there were mainly 3 Black people there in Bristol, they paraded the streets across the centre with placards in support of the employment of coloured labour. At first, the bus industry said, no, we're not doing anything to discriminate Blacks, but it came out in the newspaper. This is actually an excerpt from the Bristol Evening Post. And what happened was, in that newspaper, they actually admitted after research that there is a big coloured bar on the buses. So that is really, really not a good thing at all. And they got shamed up. They got sued £35 in those days. And Roy Hackett, he actually wrote about people, that Black people were not allowed in the pubs in Bristol. They were not allowed to eat in Bristol either. And by 1952, there was a big riots going on in Bristol. And then it is actually after that, after 2 world wars, Britain was left torn. In 1948, Britain needed people who would take very little pay, who can come over and help rebuild Britain. And that is when thousands of Black people arrived by ship from Commonwealth countries. The public had absolutely no idea why these people were coming. It was kept hidden from the public. So here is a quick video on the Windrush generation.
They've come to seek work in Britain and are ready and willing to do any kind of job that will help the motherland along the road to prosperity.
And many Caribbean immigrants faced huge discrimination. They were not even allowed for council housing, did you know, when they came to stay, even though they were coming here to rebuild Britain. And a survey in Birmingham showed that 15 Black people out of 1,000 were actually allowed to be a Black tenant. And most of them went into poor quality housing, into prostitution areas, into slums, into homeless areas like Notting Hill areas. And St. Paul's was another one. And that's where they had to stay. And did you know they were getting paid less than half when they had jobs than their white counterparts? And there were further riots targeting immigrant and minority populations in East London and Notting Hill in the 1950s, leading then to the establishment of the Notting Hill Carnival. There was a lady actually who went to St. Pancras Town Hall and fought and said, do you know, Black people have got so many good things that they can share with the community. So Caribbean Carnival was held on 30th January 1959 in St. Pancras Town Hall, London, as a response to the problematic state of race relations at the time. The UK's first widespread racial attacks in the Notting Hill race riots, in which 108 people were charged, that had only occurred in the previous year. And that's when, that is history. That shows the first Notting Hill Carnival that happened then in 1959. That was thanks to a Black woman going to the town hall and fighting that our culture needs to be celebrated. And there's a nice police officer there who joined the procession and joined the people. Riots were becoming very common. This picture from the 1960s shows people protesting for equal rights. It reminds me a little bit of the Black movement that happened very recently, the Black Lives Matter movement. And then, you know what? The Parliament woke up at last. It took as late as 1965, after placards like these were very famous, written there, that for the first time, the first Race Relations Act was passed in 1965, according to law that specifically prohibited racial segregation, but still didn't include legislation about employment or housing until 1968. Students actually showed their support too, and it was backed by the local MP, Tony Benn, as well as Harold Wilson, who became Labour leader a year later. And this is the actual race relations legislation, which I put up there, which came into play from 1965, but didn't include everything. After that, you would think things get better for the Blacks, but they didn't get better because they actually faced discrimination from Asians. And what happened was there was a big immigration movement from Africa. The next wave of immigrants came from Africa, mostly from Kenya and then Uganda, as certain African regimes encouraged a policy of Africanization. Life became more difficult for Asians living there, and many started moving to Britain. In 1972, 60,000 Asians were expelled by the President Idi Amin from Uganda, many of whom were allowed to settle in Britain. And because these Asians had come across such a negative experience from this Black African leader, they thought all Blacks were the same, and they then showed lots of racism towards Africans. That was in the early 70s. Then later on in the late 70s and 80s, there was a movement in Britain where the National Front and the far-right groups were very rife. They actually attacked Blacks first. Blacks actually got it more worse than coloureds. And it was during this period, it was also common for Black footballers to be subjected to racist chanting from crowd members. I do remember in 1981, West Ham United winning, and I really wanted to go and watch a West Ham United football match. And my dad said, he turned around and said, sit down quietly, you're not going, because that is not a place for any Asian to go football matches. They were only there for white British people only. You would get killed, he said. And I felt very sad about that. And I still support West Ham United. And I still haven't been to see a football match because I can hear my dad's words ringing in my ears. You're not going. Okay. In the early 1980s, there was societal racism, discrimination and poverty alongside further perceptions of powerlessness and oppressive policing. It sparked another set of series of riots, especially substantial amongst the African Caribbean population. These riots took place in St. Paul's in 1980, Brixton and Notting Hill Gate in 1982, even though the carnival was going on there to unite everybody. Handsworth was another area, and Tottenham happened in 1985, so it carried on throughout the 80s. Then Brexit happened, the withdrawal of the UK from the European Union. And guess what? Brexit increased racist incidents where locals became hostile to foreigners or perceived foreigners. And Black people got it the most, unfortunately. Racism within the United Kingdom has resulted in the case of riots and racially motivated murders. And the latest one, the last one, is COVID, believe it or not. And I know James did mention this in one of his talks, that racism actually increased towards members of the BAME community after COVID, because it was a well-known fact that people of darker skin got coronavirus the most. It was not mentioned clearly why that was, because of our low immune system and vitamin D, and because of the fact that Blacks were right at the forefront, being doctors, dentists, care workers, putting our lives out there right at the right in the forefront. That's why we all got the coronavirus more. And because we unfortunately have low vitamin Ds because of our Blacks. It was not portrayed at all in the media, but it was shown that we get the virus the most. And I actually know a Black lady who's my friend who was in a supermarket, and somebody told her to go home because you're spreading the virus here amongst all of us. And this is now, a couple of months ago only. And we think things have got better. Things have not got better. And then right during the middle of COVID, right during lockdown, the Black Lives Matter movement then started. And that movement started because of the death in America, which shows this racism is still there. It's all covered under the carpet. And we are still experiencing racism now as well. So I will stop there because we've reached modern times. And I do feel sad. When I spoke as a DL in that Black Lives Matter talk, I actually cried. For some of us here who may have been there, while I was doing the speech, people were crying in the audience, and I started crying. I could feel the vibes from the audience, the sad vibes from the audience, and it was very, very hard. And that's the first speech that I've done as a DL where I actually cried while I was making the speech. It really, really was huge that day for me, the vibes that I got from the audience. Hello everybody and welcome. I'm Sidra Naeem. I am the Deputy Lord Lieutenant in Essex, and as you can see I am from the BAME community. So thank you very much for inviting me here to give my contribution. I would like to share this very important message that Black Lives Matter. Black people have been oppressed throughout history. Black slavery in America started in 1619. It has been hundreds of years since Black slaves were freed, yet their future generations are not fully free. They are not yet free from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet free from social and economic oppression. After 2 world wars, Britain was left torn. In the 50s, the British actually invited Black people to come and help rebuild Britain. Thousands of black people arrived by ship from Commonwealth countries, yet the public had no idea why they were here. They faced racism and were likened to dogs, while they rebuilt Britain with very low wages. This was the Windrush generation. Some went to rejoin the armed forces, having fought for Britain during the war. The British Nationalities Act gave all Commonwealth citizens free entry. They were not here as illegal immigrants. It was people of colour that kept the nation moving. And this can still be seen today on London's transport. Black people are still pivotal in our domestic and hospitality industries too. In 2006, the then last Labour government claimed that the economic benefit gained from black migrants was £6 billion. Today, Britain has the world's 5th biggest economy, and it is black people and the legacy of immigration that have helped the country to achieve this successful economic status. Black people have died. Black people have died for our country, boosted its economy, cared for its people, and produced some of its greatest athletes. A recent reflection now on today's world. Some of the major problems facing mankind today are wars over wealth, power, and race, atrocities committed in the name of race, media and negative portrayal of blacks as criminals, drug dealers, or even being less intelligent, division within our own societies, forced deportation of people from the Windrush generation, leaders selling tales of deceit, all leading to racism. Institutional racism is taking place in educational establishments, in councils, in police stations, and in courts. Black people are not given the same opportunity to get to higher job positions. They have to work 10 times more harder than others to get to the same top positions, and sometimes with lower pay. How do we solve all these problems? We need to reflect. All mankind is from Adam, so we are all descendants from the same ancestor, making us brothers and sisters of one another. All messengers from Adam to the present day were all from different nations. Moses was from Egypt. Jesus spoke Aramaic. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was born in Arabia. And yet we happily follow all their religions. A lot of saints who are elevated were also from different lands. Some were black, some were white. A reading from the Quran, chapter 49, verse 13 states, "O mankind, we created you from a single soul, male and female, and made you into nations and tribes, so that you may come to know one another. Truly the most noble of you in the sight of God is the most righteous of you." This implies there is no place for racism. God rejects certain individuals or nations being favored because of their wealth, power, or race. God created human beings as equals. Who are to be distinguished from each other only on the basis of their faith and piety. All aspects of humanity promote peace and justice. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself showed us many examples of this. He freed and chose an African slave to give the call to the Muslim prayer, and he was the poorest and darkest man amongst his companions. In Prophet Muhammad's last sermon, just before he passed away, he said, "O mankind, your God is one and your forefather Adam is one. A white person is not better than a black person, and a black person is not better than a white person, except in piety." The fact that these were his last few words showed the importance of unity and peace. And this nation will not be fully free until all its citizens are free. Everyone ought to have the right to be treated as equals. We must all stand together against all oppression. So I just wanted to finish on that note. Okay.
Okay, thank you so much, Lady Sidra Naeem. Thank you so much for that. Very, very educational once again. It's always interesting to hear the history of hate crime. And this is one of the reasons I think a lot of times people ask me why celebrate Black History Month. And I'm like, Black people have gone through a lot. And if Britain has decided to honor Black people or BAME community for their contribution to Britain with a whole month of celebration, then we have to embrace it. If we as Black people do not embrace Black History Month, then we as just as good as throwing it back into the government's face. To say that, well, thank you very much for giving it to us, but we actually don't want it. And a lot of, unfortunately, there's a lot of Black people here that don't know what people have gone through in the past to give them the freedom that they enjoy today, because people have fought the fight and we just don't want the cycle. And with this year, when you see Black Lives Matters movement going on, you just realize that if we're not careful, if care is not taken, we will go back to the way it was. And nobody wants that. What we want is equality and justice. And if we don't celebrate each other, we don't celebrate our freedom, we don't celebrate our past, we don't celebrate, I mean, there's people, Black people, BAME community people doing phenomenal things out there that don't get celebrated for it. And it's a real shame. And one of the reasons why I will keep on going with Black History Month is to keep celebrating those who are doing exceptional things in the community that wouldn't normally get picked up. We've got to put a stop to this, and we've got to keep on celebrating Black History Month. So thank you so much, Sidra, for that. Very, very useful to give us the background into hate crime for the BAME community. I mean, some of it was down to interracial hate crime as well. But I'm going to give opportunities very quickly to take a few questions. Okay, we'll take your question, Rani. You're the only one with your hands up at the moment.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Thank you, Tunde. Just a few observations, and I have made a chat note that, Sidra, your personal view on this was very touching, very touching. I think that everybody who has come to this country as an immigrant and who loves this country because we have embraced it. We chose to be part of this country. We are part of this country. And for me, because I'll be 70 next weekend, it is 50 years, 60 years of my life. And to not be accepted is very hard, is very hard. I think that the divisions between us have got to be broken down. And that's why I always support the police, because they have to do law and order. They are the key workers. And the rise in attacks on the police is something I want to just highlight for you. Just a quick summary, though, about slavery, if I may, Yutunda, and an observation on my part, is that slavery has always been with human beings, right from the Stone Age. Because it's men usually, except for Boadicea, who went out as the warrior queen, who went and fought. And when they fought, the spoils of war were rape and pillage and slavery. They went out and they captured different tribes and took them home and made them work for slaves. So slavery is nothing new. In fact, the origins of the Black slavery movement were from things that were happening over with the Arab trades. But then again, we also have to look at the African tribes who sold their own people to the white slave traders. It is absolutely right. This is something that is in human nature. You take a vulnerable person, usually living in a country where they're very happy, they have their own customs, their own history, and you subjugate them to your view.
Okay, so any questions? Just put your hand up. Mac, Onife is works with the Essex Police, looking after driving equality and cohesion, working with the BAME community, if I'm correct, with across Essex. So over to you, Mac.
Good evening, everyone. But personally, if I'll start from myself. I am the chair of the Minority and Ethnic Support Association of Essex Police. I'm also the General Secretary of the National Black Police Association. And I was quite interested in Lady Sidra's presentation when she was talking about the origins of hate. But when you look at it, including that of Rani's, it goes further back, that people have always, for one reason or other, the spoils of war has always created that. And slavery, it came about, the capitalist movement of making money, And there's one race in particular, which is the black race, have been the ones that have been more targeted towards the effects of inequality, and it's gone on. And unfortunately, policing has always been used as a tool to suppress the individuals, and it's gone on. And it becomes a thought process. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much to go into this topic. I'm going to give opportunities very quickly to take a few questions.
Councillor McGarrigan has been extremely patient.
Oh, that's fine. Thank you very much. And I've been delighted to be part of this. I said to you, Tunde, I'm a big fan of Black History Month. As a councillor, we have a responsibility. Bit of my own personal history as well. It's nice to see the references to, nice, no blacks, no Irish, no dogs, because my dad came over from Ireland in 1949. So lived through all of that, and he was of the generation that kind of shrugged it off, and I was really angry. That experience, and I think people forget or just never understood the antipathy towards the Irish in this country at that time, which actually kind of blew up again during the Troubles, not surprisingly. It's interesting because we do have this shared experience, and I think we forget, and we need to remember much more. Both Boy George and John Lydon wrote autobiographies called No Blacks, No Irish, No Dogs, because they came from the same Irish background as well.
Thank you so much for your contribution there. Very impressive. And to be quite honest with you, I totally agree with you. Okay, that's all the questions. Rani, I know you put your hands up. The Mayor of Basildon, Councillor David Burton Sampson, will be speaking now.
And I thank you for inviting me here today. I would urge you all, we know that COVID is getting the BAME community more than it's getting others, and we know there's reasons for that, as Sidra highlighted. So please look after yourselves. But I can't believe, again, and I say this every year, in fact I say this every time I speak, that I'm sat here now in 2020 and we are still talking about this. Even in the middle of a global pandemic, we're having this conversation, because during that global pandemic, when we should have been together and supporting each other, this has come even more to the fore because of what happened in America and the ripple effect of the, let's be frank, the murder of George Floyd in America by that police officer has rippled through the world. So it's crazy that we're still having this conversation, but we have to keep having it. It's so good and not good to hear people's experiences today. It's so good that people can come here and share those lived experiences. And you know, I think so many of us on here have at some point in our lives experienced some sort of hate towards us. I have, both because of the colour of my skin and because of my sexuality, and because I'm from Liverpool. That's happened as well. But the colour of the skin and the sexuality thing, I've had in so many different arenas. And somebody mentioned earlier, even as mayor of this borough, on one of my very early occasions of raising the rainbow flag for Pride, to be racially abused was absolutely disgusting. And it's this disgusting when it happens to anybody. It really is. But we feel it. We still feel it. And Tunde said it was happening when I was at school, and me too. I'll never forget the bullying I got at school, being the only person of any colour in my primary school. And then when my mum finally took the school to task on it, the bullying that I was getting every lunchtime, the response of the teachers is that we think he needs to see a child psychologist. And I ended up at a child psychologist because people were bullying me and calling me the most horrendous names in that school playground. And it's still happening today. Teachers are putting that wall up that it's your fault, not anybody else's fault, not the people who are perpetrating this disgusting hate upon us. A wound has been opened as a result of the Black Lives Matters movement that's evolving, and this time the wound has to be healed. It can't just be stitched up to reopen again. It has to be healed this time. We've got to see genuine change across our town here in Basildon, across the country, and across our world, because we are seeing hate rising. In the last 3 months, we've seen hate crime go up again. And the latest statistics I've seen from June to August was 135 hate crimes in our borough were recorded, with 17 homophobic, 19 on a person's disability, and 86 on racial reported hate crimes. And that just really saddens me. And I know it saddens everybody on this call, because you're here to fight hate crime and to make sure that hate crime stops. You know, that poor nurse in Pitsea who had been caring for COVID patients and came home and had that horrendous note pushed through her door. Again, I was saddened to see that right in the middle of the conversation around Black Lives Matter, and then we see that on our own doorstep. We can't get angry. We need to get active, and we need to get positive, because anger can be destructive if it's not channeled in the right way. Quite often, a reactive anger can be worse than a positive way forward. Thank you, Tunde.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. And thank you so much to the Mayor of Basildon, Councillor David Burton-Sampson. Thank you, Councillor Adrian McGurran, for joining us. A surprise visit. Thank you. Thank you, James Swatton. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Dungay. Thank you, Olayinka. Thank you, Rani. Thank you, Sidra. I think she's gone now. Thank you, James. Thank you, Andrew. Thank you. I'm trying to mention. Oh no, she's still here. Sidra's still here. Oh, Aisha. Thank you. Jen, thank you. Alice, thank you everyone for being here today. We thank you all very much. Good night. God bless you. And thank you. Well done, everyone. Thank you. Good night.
Bye, everyone.